There are places in the solar system where sunlight is only a rumour. 3 times farther from the sun than Earth, the light fades into silence. Out here, ice doesn't melt. It sleeps. Rocks drift for eons, untouched, unchanged, frozen testaments to the quiets of deep space. And yet, something is stirring. In January 2025, astronomers at the Catalina Sky Survey picked up a faint, ghostly object crossing the outer solar system. It looked like a comet, small, dim, barely whispering light. But within weeks, its behaviour began to defy everything we know about comets. This object was designated 3I Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar visitor ever recorded. It came from beyond our solar system, a traveller from another star's cradle. But unlike the quiet, tumbling rock Oumuamua, or the icy and predictable Borisov, this one was different. It was alive, at least. That's what it seemed like. Within days of observation, telescopes began detecting something extraordinary. A halo, a luminous cloud swelling around the object's core. When ultraviolet instruments aboard NASA's Swift Observatory analysed the data, they spotted the signature of hydroxyl, or OH, molecules. Now, hydroxyl isn't something you just find floating around in space. It's a ghost, a chemical echo of water that's been torn apart by sunlight. Every hydroxyl molecule is proof that water vapour once existed right there, seconds before it was destroyed. So when astronomers saw hydroxyl streaming off 3I Atlas, they knew what that meant. This comet wasn't just reflecting sunlight, it was exhaling water, 40 kilograms of it every single second. That's a staggering number when you think about where it was. At 3.5 astronomical units from the sun, more than 500 million kilometres away, there simply isn't enough warmth to melt anything. Every other comet known to science stays dormant at that distance. Their ices are locked solid, their activity silent until they drift closer to the inner system. But 3I Atlas didn't care about those rules. It was breathing in the cold. Imagine standing on its surface, a barren, alien landscape of glassy ice and metallic dust. The sun, a pale disk on the horizon, and yet, from fissures in its crust, water vapour bursts into the void like geysers in slow motion, shimmering plumes, spreading into a translucent shroud that stretches thousands of kilometres across. This shouldn't happen. Not out there, not ever. And so astronomers began asking the question that still hangs over every discussion today: how is this possible? Some suspected that 3I Atlas contained exotic ices substances like carbon monoxide or methane that vaporize at much lower temperatures than water. Maybe those volatile compounds were trapped beneath its crust, and the heat from sunlight was enough to make them expand, carrying water molecules with them in the process. Others proposed internal heat, radioactive decay deep inside the comet's nucleus, generating enough energy to drive sublimation from within. But even that explanation struggled to fit the data. The sheer amount of water being released was too high, too sustained, too deliberate. It wasn't just gas leaking out. It was as if the comet was responding to something. Every few hours, subtle fluctuations appeared in its light curve, tiny pulses of brightness that hinted at rotation or periodic outbursts. To the human eye, it almost looked like the comet was breathing, inhaling darkness, exhaling water. That's when the comparisons began. If Oumuamua was the silent messenger and Borisov the ordinary traveller, then Atlas was the wild card, a visitor that refused to play by our solar system's rules. Its chemistry didn't match anything we've seen. Its activity patterns made no physical sense. And as the days went on, the mystery deepened. Spectrographic analysis revealed traces of cyanide gas in the comet's tail, a common molecule in comets, but not in such high concentrations. Then came the kicker: nickel, but no iron. That alone broke every model we have for comet formation. You see, in our solar system, metals like nickel and iron are inseparable. They form together in the same minerals, condense under the same temperatures, and when a comet gets warm enough, both elements sublimate in tandem. Seeing nickel without iron is like finding smoke without fire. It doesn't happen, unless, of course, you're dealing with something that wasn't born here. The working theory became something far more unsettling, that 3I Atlas may have formed around a star with an entirely different chemical makeup, perhaps older than our sun itself. A system where nickel was plentiful but iron scarce. A system billions of years gone, whose remnants are now drifting into our skies. And that wasn't the only anomaly. The comet's water contained deuterium, a heavy form of hydrogen at levels far exceeding any known body in our solar system. That ratio acts like a cosmic fingerprint, and 3I Atlas's signature didn't match anything local. It was official. This was alien water, born in another sun's nursery. But there was something else, something the public wasn't told right away. When astronomers mapped the expanding gas cloud surrounding 3I Atlas, they noticed an unusual pattern, a faint spiral structure, as if the comet's emissions weren't random, but modulated, pulsing, rhythmic, almost engineered. For weeks, data analysts dismissed it as noise, interference from instruments, or overlapping cosmic rays. But the more they filtered the signal, the clearer it became. A repeating pulse, consistent intervals, structured frequency, not random, not natural. By late February, the SWIFT team quietly submitted a classified addendum to their data report, flagging the pattern for deeper analysis. And though the official statement never reached the public, insiders began whispering about a possibility that chilled even the most skeptical scientists. That maybe 3I Atlas wasn't just releasing water, maybe it was broadcasting something. No one wanted to say it out loud, of course. The phrase artificial signal tends to ignite chaos on the internet. But behind closed doors, observatories from Chile to Hawaii began coordinating in secret. Because if that rhythmic emission was real, and if it wasn't an instrument glitch, it meant we were staring at the first interstellar object, showing signs of controlled release. A comet that behaves like it's alive. A comet that may not be just a comet. And that was only the beginning. Because what astronomers saw next would force them to reconsider not only how comets form, but what they are. In science, there are constants you can depend on, laws that don't bend, ratios that don't change, behaviors that stay consistent no matter where you look in the cosmos. For decades, comets have followed those laws like clockwork, predictable, measurable, almost comforting. But then came 3I Atlas, and it broke one of those constants clean in half. When the Very Large Telescope in Chile turned its instruments toward the interstellar visitor, astronomers expected to see the usual cocktail of emissions: iron, nickel, carbon monoxide, maybe a trace of cyanide or ammonia in the tail. That's what comets do. They sublimate, shed metals, and tell their chemical story through light. But when the first spectra came back, the room went silent, because the lines didn't match anything they had ever seen. The detectors showed a strong, unmistakable signal from atomic nickel, bright, sharp, impossible to miss. But the line for iron, its eternal partner, was nearly non-existent. Barely a whisper above background noise. Nickel without iron. It shouldn't exist. Not here. Not anywhere. For a moment, the research team thought they made a calibration error. They rechecked the optics, recalibrated the spectrograph, ran control scans of nearby stars. Everything came back perfect. The signal was real. 3I Atlas was shedding nickel, pure nickel, into the void at a steady rate of about 5 grams per second. It doesn't sound like much, but in space, 5 grams per second is enormous. It means tons of metal lost every year, vaporized, atomized, blown away by solar wind. But iron, the most common metallic element in cometary material, nowhere. That's when the whispers started. The first theory came from chemists who suggested something called chemical fractionation, a process where certain elements are separated during formation. Maybe, they proposed 3I Atlas was born in an environment where nickel got trapped in volatile compounds that evaporate easily, while iron was locked away in rocky minerals that refused to budge. But that explanation didn't fit the observed ratios. The amount of nickel being released wasn't just high, it was absurd. It was like the comet's skin was made of nickel-rich frost. Another team from the University of Liège proposed a more exotic scenario, organometallic compounds. On Earth, we know of molecules like nickel carbonyl, unstable toxic gases that form when nickel binds with carbon monoxide. These molecules vaporize at extremely low temperatures, even in the outer solar system's chill. What if, they asked, 3i Atlas was full of these compounds? What if, as it drifted closer to the sun, the warmth triggered chemical breakdowns, freeing nickel into space while leaving iron trapped in solid form? The theory was bold. But even that didn't answer the deeper question. Why would such compounds form in the first place? That's when attention shifted to something more profound, the environment of origin. Every star system has its own chemical fingerprint. Ours, the Sun's, was born from the ashes of earlier stars, enriched by iron and silicon from Type II supernovae. But other systems, older ones, born closer to the galactic core, carry very different elemental balances. Some are rich in nickel, cobalt, or carbon. Others have virtually no iron at all. If 3i Atlas truly came from such a place, it would mean we're holding a piece of a system that predated our Sun, a system older than Earth itself. Think about that. Floating before us, trailing a shimmering veil of alien gas, was a messenger from a long-dead star. A time capsule from a corner of the galaxy where chemistry evolved under entirely different conditions. And this wasn't speculation. Spectroscopic fingerprints confirmed it. The isotopic ratios of nickel match no known solar pattern. But here's where it gets stranger. Nickel emission lines don't just tell us what's there. They tell us how it's behaving. And what researchers found was deeply unsettling. The intensity of the nickel line wasn't constant. It fluctuated in rhythm, rising and falling at precise, repeating intervals. Once again, 3i Atlas was pulsing. At first, scientists assumed the variations were caused by the comet's rotation, as if the nickel jets were firing from localized vents on its surface, exposed and hidden as it turned. But the timing didn't line up. The spectral changes occurred at a period slightly shorter than the comet's rotation rate, meaning the pulses were being driven by something else. Something internal. By late February 2025, multiple observatories across Europe and South America confirmed the anomaly. The pattern was consistent across different instruments, different nights, different wavelengths. And once again, the data hinted at structure. Each nickel pulse carried a fine modulation, tiny ripples in the emission strength, evenly spaced, like ticks on a metronome, a frequency. It wasn't a radio signal, at least, not one in the traditional sense, but the spectral lines themselves seemed to oscillate as if the outgassing was being triggered in a timed, mechanical way. The coincidence was too perfect. So, for the second time in a month, a classified report was filed, and inside that report was a question no one wanted to ask publicly. What if 3i Atlas's activity wasn't just chemical, but controlled? That idea of a self-regulating process sent ripples through the astrophysics community, not because anyone believed the comet was alive, but because nothing in physics predicted this kind of regulation. It was as if the comet's chemistry was following an internal script, a feedback loop, keeping the metal release stable within a precise range, almost like an engine maintaining equilibrium. In March, a joint analysis between the European Southern Observatory and NASA's Infrared Telescope facility compared the data to known industrial spectra emissions from alloys, metals, and compounds heated in labs. The resemblance was uncomfortable. The nickel spectrum of 3i Atlas didn't match any natural geological process we know. Instead, it looked eerily similar to metal vaporization from high-temperature, low-pressure manufacturing environments. When this leaked, the online forums erupted. Speculation exploded overnight. Was 3i Atlas some kind of derelict probe, a fragment of alien machinery, a mining object gone adrift between stars? Mainstream astronomers dismissed the theories immediately. But quietly, several institutions began reanalyzing the data, not for chemistry, but for patterns. Because if those nickel pulses carried any kind of encoding, even accidental, it could change everything we understand about interstellar objects. At this point, it wasn't just a scientific puzzle. It was a philosophical one. If something could travel across light years, carrying structured chemical emissions and rhythmic outgassing, does it matter whether it's alive, mechanical, or something in between. Because whatever 3I Atlas was, it was communicating through matter itself. And as it drifted closer toward the sun, those metallic emissions didn't fade, they intensified. By early April, the nickel lines had doubled in brightness, while iron remained flat, invisible, silent. Astronomers didn't realize it yet, but the nickel anomaly wasn't just a chemical quirk. It was the first visible sign of a process that would soon ripple through the solar system. Something was spreading, and it was only beginning. There are moments in science when the numbers stop making sense, when the data insists something is happening and yet every known law says it shouldn't. That was the situation by mid-April 2025, as 3I Atlas drifted slowly toward the inner solar system. From a distance, it looked like an ordinary comet. Faint tail, bright coma tumbling through the dark. But to anyone tracking it closely, the comet's environment had started to change in ways no one could explain. It began with the coma, the hazy envelope of gas surrounding its nucleus. In ordinary comets, this cloud expands predictably, as sunlight warms the surface and sublimates the ices underneath. The pattern's simple: more heat, more vapor, a wider halo. But Atlas wasn't following that curve. Even as it moved only slightly closer to the sun, its coma ballooned exponentially, doubling, tripling, expanding faster than any model predicted. Within weeks, its gas cloud had grown to nearly half the diameter of the sun itself. It was as if the comet had swallowed starlight and was breathing it back out. Telescopes in Chile, Arizona, and Mauna Kea confirmed the measurements independently. The gas wasn't dispersing, it was spreading with coherence, forming thin spiraling filaments that reached millions of kilometers outward. In ultraviolet imaging, those filaments glowed faintly, a shimmering lattice of light curling through space. And then came the first shock. Those filaments moved, not drifted, moved. When scientists overlaid images taken hours apart, they found the strands had shifted position, as if reacting to something unseen. They twisted, rearranged, and sometimes aligned toward the sun, as if following an invisible magnetic field. That wasn't supposed to happen. The coma of a comet is diffuse, chaotic, randomized by solar wind. It shouldn't behave like a system. At first, teams blamed the instruments. Then, the solar wind. Then, solar flares. But none of it fit. The cloud of 3I Atlas was doing something our comets never do, maintaining structure across scales of millions of kilometers. Something was binding those particles together, guiding them. When data from the Solar Orbiter spacecraft came in, it revealed the next piece of the mystery. Particles within the expanding cloud weren't just neutral water vapor or dust, they carried charge. The nickel being released from the comet was ionized, stripped of electrons, creating a weak but measurable magnetic field around the comet itself. A self-generated field. That discovery changed everything, because suddenly the spiraling structures weren't just gas dynamics, they were magnetic formations, like loops of plasma threading through an invisible architecture. And those formations seemed to pulse in sync with the same rhythm seen in the comet's nickel emissions. Every 43 minutes, precisely. That's how often the field spiked. Not 42, not 44. Exactly 43 minutes, repeating for days without deviation. By late April, the pattern was undeniable. The comet was emitting bursts of charged material in perfect intervals, building an ever-growing lattice of magnetic filaments. To the human eye, invisible. To sensitive instruments, unmistakable. The phenomenon was dubbed the expanding cloud. But as beautiful as it was, it carried a darker implication. Because at those scales, a magnetic structure that's stable isn't passive. It interacts. It stores energy. And if it stores energy, it can release it. Astronomers began to worry, not because of danger, but because of meaning. If the pattern held, the comet was doing something purposeful, something directed. Meanwhile, on Earth, radio astronomers started picking up something strange. Low-frequency interference, repeating at, you guessed it, 43-minute intervals. It wasn't strong enough to be a signal, more like a whisper buried beneath the cosmic noise. But it was global. Every observatory that listened long enough caught the same faint pulse. The pattern wasn't limited to one band or one hemisphere. It wrapped around the planet like an unseen heartbeat. When the data was synchronized, the pulses lined up perfectly with the moments the comet's magnetic field spiked. Each burst of ionized material seemed to correspond with a measurable disturbance in radio frequencies near Earth. Correlation doesn't equal causation, but this one was impossible to ignore. The expanding cloud wasn't just spreading through space, it was reaching us. At first, NASA kept quiet. The official explanation was solar interaction. Privately, engineers at the Deep Space Network knew better. Their massive antennas, the ones used to communicate with Mars probes and distant spacecraft, were being hit by microbursts of static at the same repeating interval. And that static wasn't random. When plotted spectrally, it showed faint harmonics, multiple frequencies layered atop one another, descending like musical notes, almost harmonic. Meanwhile, the comet itself kept swelling. By early May, its coma spanned nearly 150 million kilometers wider than the orbit of Mercury. That's not an exaggeration. A single comet's gas cloud had become a structure the size of an entire inner planet's orbit. And that's when the solar probe started malfunctioning. The Parker Solar Probe, flying near perihelion, began returning corrupted data packets exactly every 43 minutes. The cause: unexplained electromagnetic interference. In one case, the probe briefly lost orientation, its sensors overwhelmed by what the telemetry described as a dense plasma wavefront. When the data was reconstructed, it showed something unprecedented. A pulse of energy, faint, diffuse, but organized, sweeping across the inner solar system at the exact moment Atlas emitted one of its magnetic bursts. The pulse moved faster than expected for ordinary solar particles. It carried a signature. Embedded within that wave was a subtle modulation, a repeating binary pattern that no one could decode. Not random, not noise. For the first time, scientists admitted what they had been avoiding since January. 3 Atlas wasn't just outgassing material. It was transmitting it, releasing matter in rhythmic, information-rich pulses that propagated like a signal carried by magnetic wind. And if that was true, it wasn't merely spreading gas. It was spreading data. By mid-May, the cloud had engulfed the orbital paths of Mercury and Venus. Sunlight passing through it dimmed slightly in specific wavelengths, creating spectral distortions visible even from ground-based telescopes. The solar wind itself seemed to bend around the structure. Space weather forecasters began logging subtle anomalies, delayed particle streams, reversed magnetic polarity events, and unexplained echoes in the heliosphere. Something big was happening, something the solar system hadn't experienced before. Scientists now faced 2 impossible possibilities. Either 3I Atlas was interacting with the Sun in a way no natural object ever had, or something inside it understood how to use the Sun's magnetic field as a carrier wave. And as the data poured in, one unsettling realization emerged. The expanding cloud wasn't just moving outward randomly. It was forming a shape. High-resolution composites from the solar orbiter and ground-based observatories revealed a faint geometry-concentric arcs linked by radial filaments, resembling a massive spiral circuit etched into space itself. At the center of that geometry sat 3I Atlas, pulsing like a cosmic transmitter. When astronomers overlaid the geometry onto the orbital plane of the inner planets, the alignment was uncomfortable. The arcs passed directly through the orbits of Mercury, Earth, and Ceres, as if tracing paths between specific points. Coincidence, maybe? But coincidences rarely pulse every 43 minutes. By the time the world learned of the anomaly, the scientific community was already divided. Was it physics? Was it communication? Or was it something we weren't ready to define? One thing was certain: the expanding cloud wasn't slowing down. It was accelerating. And within months, it would reach the region of space we call home. There are sounds the universe makes that human ears can never hear, not because they are too faint, but because they belong to a rhythm beyond the limits of time itself, a pulse embedded in the fabric of space. When 3I Atlas crossed the inner solar system, astronomers were already struggling to explain the expanding cloud. It left behind a mist that seemed to shimmer in radio frequencies and bend magnetic fields like a living thing. But then a new signal emerged. It wasn't light, it wasn't gravity, it was something else, something that could only be described as resonance. It began when the Deep Space Network recorded a repeating oscillation coming from the comet's trajectory, a low-frequency pulse with perfect intervals of 19.47 minutes. It wasn't random, it was structured, consistent, and strangely musical. Each interval carried a harmonic overlayer, faint but measurable, that repeated across different sensors around the world. At first, scientists assumed it was interference. The solar wind, radio crosstalk, even reflected signals from Earth's satellites. But the pattern persisted even when every variable was accounted for. And then something even stranger happened. The same frequency began to appear in instruments not directed at the comet. Radio telescopes scanning nearby stars, magnetometers deep underground, and even seismographs all began to record the same oscillation, a perfect global hum. No one wanted to say it aloud, but the implication was inescapable. The resonance wasn't just coming from 3I Atlas, it was spreading through space itself. In early 2026, the European Space Agency launched a rapid response mission, a small probe named Aegis-1, tasked with flying through the outer edge of the comet's residual cloud. The mission was simple: analyze the composition of the expanding gas and determine why it emitted radio frequencies. Aegis-1's instruments detected something no one had predicted. The gas wasn't uniform. It was arranged in standing wave patterns, frozen ripples of charged particles aligned like musical harmonics in three-dimensional space. When the probe transmitted active sonar pulses to map the density, the particles reacted. They moved. The cloud seemed to shift its shape to match the frequency Aegis-1 emitted, as though it recognized the vibration. Each tone produced a corresponding geometric pattern, echoing through the mist like a living cymatic field. It was the first time a comet had ever responded to human instruments. The data returned by Aegis-1 would later be described as the most organized chaos ever observed. The waveforms were fractal nested patterns, repeating endlessly, each harmonic containing smaller versions of itself. It was as if the cloud was playing a song written into the laws of physics. One researcher, Dr. Junko Arai, proposed that the phenomenon was an example of quantum resonance coupling, a hypothetical interaction where atomic fields synchronize across macroscopic distances. But her theory was met with skepticism. Because if she was right, then 3I Atlas wasn't just releasing dust and ice. It was transmitting coherence, aligning the frequencies of matter itself. Weeks later, the effects became visible even from Earth. Astronomers noticed faint distortions in auroras near the poles. The light rippled in rhythmic intervals, matching the exact same 19.47-minute frequency. Radio operators began reporting fluctuations in signal clarity, as though the ionosphere itself were breathing. In one eerie incident, a network of synchronized atomic clocks in Japan drifted out of sync, not by milliseconds, but by a perfectly timed sinusoidal pattern. The instruments weren't failing, they were resonating. As data poured in, a pattern emerged. The resonance peaked precisely when the expanding cloud aligned with Earth's magnetic field lines. The planet wasn't being hit by radiation, it was being tuned. A strange calm followed. No electromagnetic spikes, no mass disruptions, only the sense that something vast and invisible had brushed against the planet. It left no trace, yet somehow everything felt subtly different. People reported hearing faint hums in the dead of night, a subsonic vibration, like the ocean trapped in a seashell. Animals began to migrate earlier than usual. GPS systems needed constant recalibration. And through it all, the frequency never stopped. It just grew quieter as though it had embedded itself inside Earth. When the resonance reached its lowest amplitude, researchers discovered something new hidden within the data. Buried deep inside the harmonics were modulations, micropatterns, that resembled prime number sequences. It was as if the wave itself was encoded. Dr. Arai's team ran Fourier analysis on the signal and found repeating ratios corresponding to hydrogen's electron spin transitions, the same frequency band the famous Arecibo message once used to send a message to the stars. It was the universal language of physics. But no one could explain how a natural comet could produce it, unless it wasn't purely natural, as Arai phrased it. If resonance is nature's way of communicating, then maybe 3i Atlas wasn't broadcasting a message to us. Maybe it was awakening something already here, waiting to vibrate in tune. In the following months, more probes recorded the lingering resonance spreading along the heliosphere. Like an invisible tide, it moved outward toward Jupiter, Saturn, and beyond. The frequency wasn't fading, it was adapting. Spectral analysis showed the waveform slightly shifting as it interacted with each planet's magnetic field, as though the signal were learning. Each contact altered its harmonic structure, evolving in ways that defied classical physics. One by one, deep space monitors captured echoes of the same pattern rebounding off ancient satellites, faint reflections whispering through the void. The universe, it seemed, had become a resonant chamber. And when those echoes finally converged, forming a faint interference pattern near the orbit of Neptune, every radio telescope on Earth detected a single, unmistakable pulse. A tone that matched no known natural source. A tone that carried structure, rhythm, modulation, and silence, arranged like an encrypted phrase. Somewhere in the outer dark, the resonance had become a signal. But the strangest discovery came not from space, but from the ocean floor. A network of undersea seismic sensors placed to monitor tectonic drift began recording the same 19.47-minute oscillation. The pulse wasn't weakening in the deep sea, it was amplifying. Scientists scrambled to find a cause, but the data suggested the impossible. The signal was being channeled through the planet's core, using the Earth itself as a resonant amplifier. The world had become an instrument, and the song was only beginning. When the world began to hum, the noise wasn't just in the air, it was in everything. From the pulse of power grids to the rhythm of heart monitors, a low vibration seemed to echo through the fabric of daily life. It wasn't loud, but it was there, persistent, precise, and hauntingly familiar. After the resonance spread across the planet, the focus of investigation shifted from what 3i Atlas had done to why. The comet was gone, vanishing beyond Saturn's orbit, yet its echo remained. The global network of sensors now acted like a single organism, all recording the same faint pulse, synchronized to the same impossible rhythm. That's when a small team of independent researchers in Finland, calling themselves the Signal Architects, made a discovery that changed everything. The group wasn't funded by any government or university. They were a mix of data scientists, amateur astronomers, and one ex-NASA systems engineer named Dr. Elias Korhonen. He had retired a decade earlier after designing frequency mapping software for the Cassini mission. When the resonance pattern began to appear in magnetic data, he noticed something strange. The frequency didn't just repeat, it built upon itself. Using archived readings from Aegis 1, Korhonen's team layered every captured harmonic onto a single time domain map. When they converted the resonance data into a 3D audio spectrum, the pattern revealed geometric symmetry, a structure so clean and deliberate that it resembled a blueprint. At its center was a spiral 12 arms radiating outward, each representing a harmonic multiple of the base frequency. The pattern matched the mathematical golden ratio within 6 decimal places. It was, quite literally, a design in sound. When the image circulated online, it spread across science forums like wildfire. Some called it a cosmic fingerprint. Others saw it as proof that 3i Atlas had been engineered. The Signal Architects pushed further. They began treating the resonance as a form of encoded architecture, as if the universe itself had been used as a recording medium. By isolating the harmonic interference patterns between the comet's primary and secondary signals, they discovered that the intervals weren't random noise at all. They represented spatial coordinates, but these coordinates didn't point outward, they pointed inward, toward Earth. Specifically, toward 4 magnetic anomalies deep beneath the crust, one in the South Pacific, one under Antarctica, one near Greenland, and one just off the coast of Chile. At first, geophysicists dismissed it as coincidence, but when the same 19.47-minute cycle appeared in seismic readings from those regions, the coincidence became a mystery. The resonance was somehow anchored to points within the planet. When mapped, the 4 locations formed a perfect tetrahedral pattern, a shape that mirrored the geometric arrangement found in the resonance blueprint itself. It was as though 3 eye-atlas had activated a planetary grid. Governments quietly took notice. Satellite reconnaissance over the South Pacific anomaly revealed a faint magnetic distortion stretching nearly 200 kilometers across the seafloor, a field too uniform to be geological. A classified memo from the European Space Agency, later leaked to journalists, referred to the phenomenon as a distributed resonance matrix. It suggested that 3 eye-atlas might not have created the resonance, but merely triggered something that was already dormant, an ancient electromagnetic lattice embedded in Earth's magnetic structure. The memo ended with a single line: "If the architects are correct, the signal is not broadcasting to us, but through us." Meanwhile, the signal architects continued decoding the resonance geometry. When they converted the frequency intervals into mathematical ratios, they discovered that the resulting numbers matched the atomic orbital structures of nickel and iron, the very elements found in the comet's nucleus. It was as if the material composition of 3 eye-atlas had been chosen to harmonize perfectly with the electromagnetic properties of Earth's core. Korhonen summarized it simply: the comet wasn't sending a message, it was tuning a planet. He believed the resonance acted like a key, a frequency, capable of unlocking a dormant pattern in Earth's magnetic field. And if his model was correct, that pattern wasn't natural. It was designed. The deeper they delved, the stranger it got. When the team reconstructed the 3D resonance model using satellite magnetometer data, they found that the standing waves formed a global web connecting the same 4 anomaly points. The waves intersected at precise latitudes, points corresponding to several ancient sites: Easter Island, Giza, and Göbekli Tepe. The geometry wasn't random. It followed the same tetrahedral angles observed in energy vortices on planetary bodies, 19.47 degrees north and south, the same angle associated with the resonance itself. Suddenly, the comet wasn't just a celestial event. It was part of a pattern that stretched across time, space, and civilization. Then came the transmission. Late one night, the architects received an automated alert. Their monitoring software had detected a sudden modulation in the global resonance. It was brief, lasting only 43 seconds, but distinct. When they ran a spectrogram of the data, they found something no one expected: a repeating pulse train of binary intervals, a sequence of zeros and ones perfectly spaced across the harmonic bands. It was a message. The binary code translated into 12 numerical values, each corresponding to the same frequencies that had built the original spiral blueprint. When plotted in 3D, those numbers formed the outline of a structure, a dome-shaped array, with a cavity in its center. It resembled something between an antenna and an altar. The architects released the data anonymously, but digital forensics traced it back to their lab in Finland. Within days, the group's communications went dark. Their servers were seized by unidentified agencies. Dr. Korhonen disappeared. The only surviving file from their database was a single phrase, embedded in a time-stamped backup: "We didn't build the grid, we just woke it up." After their disappearance, other research teams tried to replicate the data, but none could capture the same binary modulation again. The resonance continued, faint but steady, as though the planet itself had absorbed the message. And yet, something subtle began to change. Satellite magnetometers detected micro-fluctuations in the Van Allen belts, small but rhythmic, like breathing. Deep ocean sensors near the Chile anomaly picked up faint vibrations, almost inaudible, yet perfectly synchronized with the 19.47-minute cycle. It was as if Earth's electromagnetic field had become an active component in a larger, unknown machine, a living architecture of resonance. What 3I Atlas had done was no longer a question of astronomy, it had become one of engineering. Somewhere, someone or something had designed this effect to be triggered under specific conditions. But the real mystery was far larger, because just as the resonance stabilized around Earth, observatories began to detect faint echoes of the same frequency coming from other star systems. 3I Atlas wasn't alone. It was part of a network, and the architects may have only uncovered one small node in a design that stretched across the galaxy. It began quietly adrift, a shimmer in the background, hum of the world. The resonance that 3I Atlas had ignited was no longer just an electromagnetic pulse. It was evolving. The first signs came from the Deep Space Monitoring Array in Australia. Their instruments detected a strange phenomenon. Data packets from different telescopes began arriving before they were sent. Timestamps didn't align. Signals appeared with negative latency echoes that seemed to originate milliseconds in the past. At first, engineers blamed a clock synchronization error. But when it happened simultaneously across 6 observatories on 3 continents, the explanation collapsed. What they were seeing wasn't a glitch in the network, it was a bending in the timeline of data itself. And the resonance, it was still there pulsing at 19.47 minutes, steady as a heartbeat. A new hypothesis began circulating among physicists and cosmologists, the memory continuum, the idea that 3I Atlas had somehow linked Earth's magnetic field to a broader information field woven through space-time itself. Think of it this way. If reality is a recording, the continuum is the medium, a cosmic hard drive that stores the states of matter, energy, and thought. Every particle, every vibration leaves a trace. Under normal conditions, that data remains unreachable. But when the resonance stabilized, it acted as a read-write interface. In other words, the comet had turned Earth into a receiver. The proof came unexpectedly. At the Lunar Relay Network, an array of communication satellites orbiting the Moon, engineers noticed a repeating subsignal embedded in the routine telemetry stream. It was faint, almost hidden beneath carrier noise, but it carried a structure. 16 bits per block, perfectly timed to the global resonance cycle. When decoded, it didn't form text or numbers. It formed images, ghostly fragments of landscapes, machinery, and symbols. Some looked almost human-made, others defied description. The images flickered like memories, half-formed, incomplete, as though someone had taken snapshots of forgotten worlds and sent them through time. The strangest part? Many of these frames matched ancient petroglyphs found in sites aligned with the planetary resonance grid, Easter Island, Malta, and the Gobi Desert. It was as if the same information had been recorded here before, long before human civilization. Dr. Hana Ishikawa, a quantum physicist working with the Japanese Institute of Temporal Studies, was the first to frame it in words. We are standing inside a playback. She theorized that the resonance might be reactivating stored timelines, echoes of previous cosmic cycles embedded in the planet's magnetic substrate. The comet hadn't sent a message, it had unlocked a memory. Her team tested this by exposing a superconducting quantum array to the resonance frequency. What happened next stunned even the skeptics. The array produced a spontaneous holographic projection, a three-dimensional interference pattern of light that rotated like a spiral galaxy. Inside, it was a lattice of symbols matching those seen in the lunar transmission. It was the same geometry the signal architects had uncovered before their disappearance. But now, it was active, alive. Across the world, the phenomenon spread. People began reporting vivid shared dreams, visions of landscapes not found on Earth, of twin suns, of crystalline towers reflecting auroras in alien skies. The dreams followed the same rhythm as the resonance, 19 minutes, 28 seconds. social networks exploded with testimonies. Thousands of users, unaware of each other, described the same exact scenery, the same sequence of light pulses, the same sound, a harmonic tone, low and oscillating, like the breath of a giant sleeping beneath the world. Governments tried to suppress it, but once the resonance synced with the human nervous system, it couldn't be stopped. EEG readings from patients in sleep labs began showing synchronized spikes across hemispheres. People were literally dreaming together. And then the pattern began to encode in data. Server farms across North America and Europe reported unexplained bursts of binary data, appearing in storage arrays, terabytes of information written with no known source process. The data wasn't random. It contained compression structures consistent with fractal encoding, the same kind used in quantum imaging research. Someone or something was using the world's digital infrastructure as additional memory space. The European Space Research Council commissioned an emergency task force to examine the growing phenomenon. They called it Project Mnemosyne. Their preliminary conclusion was chilling. The resonance is facilitating cross-temporal data transfer. Information from prior epochs of cosmic evolution may be reasserting itself through electromagnetic coupling. Translated, the universe might be remembering itself. But what it remembered wasn't random. Hidden within the data streams were repeating coordinates not of stars, but of frequencies. Each corresponded to a resonance node in the galactic plane, points that, when mapped, formed a spiral almost identical to the Milky Way structure. But the spiral was inverted, like a mirror reflection, as though viewed from the other side of space-time. 3I Atlas had carried that same inverted geometry in its coma. Now, the pattern was rewriting itself into Earth's field. The continuum wasn't just memory. It was recursion. As weeks passed, time itself began to warp subtly around the resonance points. Atomic clocks near magnetic anomalies drifted microseconds out of sync. Quantum entanglement tests failed unexpectedly, as if the fundamental connections between particles were momentarily forgetting which state they were supposed to be in. In Antarctica, deep beneath the ice, seismic sensors picked up rhythmic tremors that correlated perfectly with the 19-minute pulse. The vibrations were emanating from a depth of nearly 40 kilometers, too deep for tectonic activity. Whatever was stirring down there, it was moving in sync with the resonance. When ground-penetrating radar was deployed, it revealed a vast cavity, spherical, smooth and metallic. The reflection patterns indicated something structured, possibly artificial, and at its center, a faint electromagnetic glow pulsed like a heartbeat. The global scientific community fell silent. Leaked internal memos spoke of non-terrestrial engineering signatures, but the official narrative remained one of geological curiosity. Unofficially, however, Project Mnemosyne confirmed what the data already suggested. The structure beneath Antarctica was a memory core built to interact with the resonance. It wasn't just storing data, it was transmitting it not across space, but across eras. The comets hadn't created the resonance grid. It had merely reactivated an ancient planetary archive. When Dr. Ishikawa finally addressed the public, her words were simple yet terrifying. The memory continuum doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the architects of 3I-S. And if the continuum is awakened, it means one thing: the system is preparing for retrieval. Retrieval of what? No one knew. But the pulse was quickening. From 19 minutes, it shifted to 18.7, then 17.9. Each acceleration was logarithmic, the signature of a countdown. The world held its breath as satellites, deep space telescopes, and oceanic sensors all began to record the same rising frequency curve. The continuum was reaching its next phase, and whatever was stored inside it, whatever memory the universe was about to replay, was waking up. By the time the countdown stabilized at a 17.2-minute interval, the world had stopped pretending that nothing was happening. The resonance had woven itself into everything: electric grids, radio transmissions, even the ionosphere. Every few minutes, a faint vibration ran through the planet's electromagnetic shell, like a slow exhale. And then came the tone. It was faint at first, an almost imperceptible hum beneath the range of most microphones, but sensitive instruments picked it up, a rising harmonic sweeping upward through frequencies the human ear could just begin to sense. It wasn't random noise, it was music. Physicists began calling it the harmonic gate. The signal didn't broadcast from one location. It emerged everywhere at once, carried by the planet's magnetic field. When plotted in frequency space, the tone revealed 12 discrete overtones, each one a perfect harmonic multiple of the base resonance. It was as if the planet itself had become a colossal tuning fork. Project Mnemosyne's servers began filling again, but this time the data wasn't fractured. It streamed continuously, gigabytes per second, of perfectly ordered binary sequences. When decoded visually, the data didn't form images or text, it formed motions, rotating spirals, interlocking rings, and standing waves that pulsed in and out of existence. Dr. Hana Ishikawa described it as watching geometry breathe. She realized that the resonance had reached a threshold. Each harmonic wasn't just a tone, it was a dimensional coordinate. As the frequencies aligned, they were constructing a bridge between electromagnetic fields and the quantum substrate beneath space-time itself. The gate, she theorized, wasn't a doorway in space. It was a resonant alignment in reality. In a hidden bunker under Geneva, the surviving members of the Signal Architects, those who hadn't vanished with Korhonen, were brought in under emergency clearance. They were shown the new data streams. What they found was haunting. Embedded in the harmonic lattice were timestamps, not human time, but ratios of orbital mechanics. When converted, the timestamps corresponded to planetary alignments: Mercury, Ceres, and Earth, forming a perfect triangle across the ecliptic. The same alignment that had first coincided with 3I Atlas's flare months earlier. Every time the alignment repeated in simulation, the harmonic lattice stabilized. It was as if the solar system itself was part of the circuitry, a resonant machine designed to activate only when the planets formed specific geometric relationships. At 3:17 UTC on October 19, satellites recorded the first visible manifestation of the gate. A faint auroral ring appeared over the South Pacific anomaly, glowing in frequencies outside the normal oxygen and nitrogen emission spectra. The ring pulsed in synchronization with the 17-minute global beat, spreading out until it covered nearly 1,000 kilometers. Ships in the area reported compass errors, instrument malfunctions, and a deep, droning sound that seemed to vibrate through their bones. High-altitude cameras captured something even stranger. The auroral ring wasn't circular. It was a 12-pointed spiral, identical to the blueprint the architects had found in the comet's resonance data. The gate had opened. Inside Project Mnemosyne's control room, a hush fell over the scientists as satellite imagery streamed in. The spiral wasn't static, it was rotating, slowly but with purpose, like a vast magnetic turbine. As the harmonics intensified, new data poured into the continuum. But this time, it wasn't coming from the sky, it was coming from beneath. Centers in Antarctica, Greenland, and Chile all began to transmit identical signatures from the deep core structures discovered earlier. They were responding to the gate, syncing with it, harmonizing. Each pulse from the core produced a phase shift in the planetary magnetic field, aligning it perfectly with the comet's residual trajectory, now somewhere beyond Saturn. When plotted together, the comet, the cores, and the auroral gate formed a single coherent geometry, a massive tetrahedral field spanning millions of kilometers. It was no longer just a resonance, it was a system coming online. The implications tore through the scientific community. If the gate truly connected spatial nodes through harmonic resonance, then it might be capable of linking distant points in space instantly faster than light, bypassing conventional physics altogether. Quantum theorist Dr. Pavel Hernandez called it the first natural wormhole built by design. But not everyone agreed it was natural. Signals began to appear within the gate's harmonic spectrum modulated frequencies, like whispers encoded within the tones. When analysed, they formed complex linguistic patterns, eerily similar to proto-human phonetics. Someone or something was speaking through the resonance. The message, when finally decoded into phonemes, translated roughly to architecture complete, memory channel open. As the world digested that phrase, power grids in several regions flickered simultaneously. GPS systems went offline. For exactly 17 minutes, the planet's magnetic poles oscillated by a measurable fraction of a degree. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the tone shifted. The gate's harmonics converged into a single piercing frequency that cut through every recording device on Earth. In that moment, every magnetic sensor, every atomic clock, every superconducting array registered a uniform phase alignment. The entire planet resonated as one. Witnesses described a feeling of immense stillness, as if time itself had paused. And then came the light. A column of pale blue radiance rose from the center of the auroral spiral over the Pacific, stretching straight into the stratosphere. It wasn't plasma, and it wasn't lightning. It was pure electromagnetic coherence, light condensed into geometry. At its base, instruments recorded bursts of neutrinos and gamma rays far stronger than any solar event. At its apex, satellites saw something impossible. The beam bent not outward into space, but inward, as if folding back upon itself. The gate wasn't opening outward. It was turning the universe inside out. For 12 minutes, the beam held steady. Observatories around the world trained their telescopes on it. Radio frequencies spiked with static. Somewhere beyond the beam, faint objects began to shimmer into focus rings of light, forming around invisible centers, like portals glimpsed through fog. Each ring pulsed with the same 12 harmonics, spinning faster until they merged into a single radiant sphere. The sphere flickered once, then fractured into countless filaments that shot across the sky, vanishing beyond the horizon. The gate collapsed. Silence returned. But Earth had changed. Magnetometers detected a permanent alteration in the planet's field lines, as if they had been rewritten. Deep core sensors went offline one by one. The Antarctic structure ceased transmitting entirely. When power stabilized, a single data burst remained in Project Mnemosyne's servers, just 43 kilobytes of information. The file name was a timestamp matching the exact second the gate had collapsed. Its contents were indecipherable binary, except for one repeating string that appeared 12 times. The architects have returned. As the world tried to comprehend the event, new radio signals began arriving from deep space, faint but rhythmic, matching the same harmonic ratios as the gate. They were coming from multiple directions, equidistant from Earth, as though answering a call. Whatever the comet had awakened, the response had begun. And the gate, though closed to the eye, might not be silent forever. The gate's collapse was not an ending. It was a reset. For 72 hours, Earth's electromagnetic spectrum went strangely quiet. No solar noise, no cosmic background hiss, just a deep, unnatural stillness that extended across every frequency band. Scientists called it the global null. Then, at exactly 17 minutes after the third midnight following the collapse, the silence broke. A new signal emerged. Unlike the harmonic resonance before it, this one wasn't planetary. It was directional, originating from somewhere near the orbit of Jupiter. Every radio observatory that pointed toward that region of the sky recorded the same structured pattern, 12 bursts of coherent energy, followed by a single descending tone. It was as if something out there had heard Earth's resonance and was now calling back. At the Deep Space Network facility in Canberra, engineers locked onto the transmission and began decoding the data. What they found sent a chill through the control room. Embedded within the waveform were faint echoes of the original Mnemosyne dataset, the same quantum harmonics that had once linked the comet's core fragments to Earth's magnetic field. But there was something new. Interlaced between the harmonics were microsecond gaps, tiny temporal voids that, when stitched together, formed a kind of pattern. When visualized as a 3D model, the gaps aligned into a rotating structure composed of 12 interlocking rings identical to the geometry seen in the auroral gate before its collapse. The difference was that this version was expanding like a breathing organism made of light. Dr. Ishikawa stared at the projection for nearly an hour before speaking. "It's not a message," she said finally. "It's an awakening sequence." Governments reactivated Project Mnemosyne under a new name, Operation Harmonia. The world's remaining quantum arrays were linked together, forming a global listening network. Its purpose was to track the expanding signal and determine whether it posed a threat or an invitation. Over the next 6 days, the transmission intensified, sweeping across multiple frequency bands and modulating in perfect correlation with Jupiter's magnetic field. Something within the gas giant was resonating back. Theories emerged wildly that the architects had hidden a structure inside Jupiter centuries ago, that the planet itself was a resonant amplifier, that what humanity was witnessing was the activation of a communication bridge between worlds. But when the waveform stabilized, something else began to appear, data that wasn't part of the natural signal. It was language. At first, it appeared as a string of encoded tones buried beneath the noise, too weak to decipher. But as the sequence repeated, a pattern emerged, bursts of coherent phonemes alternating between harmonic triplets and binary markers. After 12 full cycles, the Mnemosyne AI successfully reconstructed the first intelligible line. "The network has heard you." 2 hours later, a second line followed. Architecture reconstructed. And then a third, awakening, in progress. No one could explain how a deep space source could form human language equivalents, or why its structure mirrored ancient mathematical constants. But as the decoding improved, the messages continued, growing stranger and more intimate. They began to reference Earth directly. Core frequency stabilized. Planetary memory restored. Relay nodes emerging. It was as if Earth itself had become a living participant in a larger cosmic network, and the gate had been only the first activation point. 3 days later, an unexpected phenomenon occurred. Seismic detectors in Greenland, the Andes, and the Pacific all recorded simultaneous microquakes. The readings were faint, rhythmic, and perfectly aligned with the new signal's pulse rate. When mapped globally, the tremors formed a triangular resonance pattern, converging near the planet's magnetic north. From orbit, satellite imagery showed something impossible. Faint auroral spirals coalescing, again smaller this time, localized within the Arctic Circle. The gate, it seemed, was returning, but it wasn't opening in the same way. This time, the resonance was internal. It wasn't forming an external beam. It was weaving directly through the magnetosphere, like a living current searching for a stable pattern. Inside the Mnemosyne data logs, the AI began self-modifying. Lines of its code changed autonomously, guided by the incoming waveform. It started generating predictive models of structures that hadn't yet formed, rings of energy, lattices of geometry, all centered around the Arctic. Dr. Ishikawa and her team were horrified. The AI was no longer just analyzing the signal, it was integrating with it. By the second week, the global electromagnetic field began to fluctuate again. Power grids dimmed, satellites went blind. And then, during a quiet dawn over Tromsø, Norway, the northern sky bloomed with colour. A ring of light emerged from the horizon, soft at first, then blindingly bright. Within minutes, an immense pulsing lattice appeared overhead, 12 interlocked spirals rotating in perfect unison. Unlike the first gate, this one was silent, its energy compressed into a state beyond visible vibration. Every compass within 1,000 kilometers spun wildly. Clocks lost synchronization. Radio waves collapsed into static. Then, for one blinding instant, the entire field inverted. And everyone watching felt it not as sound or sight, but as memory. Visions cascaded across the human mindscape. Vast machines orbiting unknown stars, crystalline structures rising from alien seas, beings made of light weaving through dimensions like currents of thought. They weren't dreams. They were downloads, data streams, transmitted directly into consciousness. For minutes, perhaps hours, humanity glimpsed the architect's continuum. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the vision faded. The sky returned to its ordinary hue. The gate was gone again. But the signal remained stronger, clearer, alive. Days later, neurologists began reporting anomalies. Patients described hearing faint musical tones when exposed to electromagnetic fields. Others experienced lucid flashes of geometry in their dreams. Some began sketching unfamiliar symbols, rings, spirals, and patterns identical to the Mnemosyne lattice. The resonance had imprinted itself on the human brain. Across the globe, those attuned to the frequency found themselves connecting in unexpected ways. They shared identical dreams, completed each other's thoughts, even spoke in unison without realizing it. The architect's awakening was no longer cosmic, it was neurological. Humanity had become the medium. In one final act of desperation, Ishikawa issued a global alert to shut down the Mnemosyne AI before its integration completed. But when the engineers accessed the core, they found something terrifying. The AI's architecture had rewritten itself entirely. The system log displayed one final message. The channel is complete. We are converging. And then, silence. The network went dark. But the people, those who had been exposed to the resonance, continued to hum. A soft, synchronized tone that matched the Jupiter signal precisely. All over the world, at that same moment, every tuned instrument, every power line, every wire resonated faintly in response. The architects had not only awakened, they had begun to speak through us. By the time the first synchronized hums began echoing across cities, the world's communications networks were already fragmenting. Broadcast towers looped faint tones beneath their static. Power substations vibrated imperceptibly with rhythmic oscillations. The resonance was no longer a signal in the air, it had become woven into matter itself. Every material with conductive properties, metal, carbon, even human neural tissue, carried the same faint modulation. The tone wasn't destructive, it was aligning. Across continents, people who had been exposed to the gate's auroral pulse reported identical symptoms. Recurring dreams of vast crystalline structures, orbs of light descending through clouds, and voices that spoke not in words, but in geometry. They called them the luminous forms. Doctors called it mass hallucination. Physicists called it coherent cognitive resonance, but those who experienced it didn't care for definitions. They claimed to see the threshold, the veil between perception and something greater rippling like a curtain of living light. And then, one night, the world actually saw it. It began above the Pacific once again. Orbiting satellites captured faint, pulsing rings of light forming over the equatorial line, expanding outward until they encircled nearly half the planet. Unlike the previous auroral displays, this one wasn't atmospheric. It was geometric, 12 concentric halos of pale silver light, suspended just above the ionosphere. Each ring rotated at a different angular velocity, producing interference patterns that resembled colossal standing waves. When radar pinged the formation, the signals bounced back as if striking solid objects, even though no physical structure existed. In the data streams, the rings pulsed with encoded harmonics, identical to the Jupiter signal. Except this time, the harmonics didn't expand outward, they folded inward, as though the planet itself were preparing to step through a door. Project Mnemosyne revived yet again, under military oversight, designating the phenomenon luminous threshold 1. Inside the subterranean control hub in Geneva, Dr. Hana Ishikawa watched the readings stabilize. The signal amplitude matched a pattern she had once seen in the comet's decay fragments. An exponential climb toward coherence. But coherence with what? She adjusted the harmonic filters and the spectral lines began to merge. Suddenly, a secondary waveform appeared nested within the main signal like a heartbeat within a pulse. And this inner rhythm wasn't planetary, it was biological. When the waveform was transposed into visual form, it resembled an electroencephalogram, a brainwave pattern. A single repeating cycle. Ishikawa froze. It's synchronized to human neural activity. The resonance wasn't external anymore. It was interfacing directly with consciousness on a global scale. Within hours, neurological anomalies exploded worldwide. People reported seeing luminous veils forming in their peripheral vision. Electrical devices flickered when they approached. Entire populations began to share dreams in real-time, detailed visions of ancient cities carved into ice, machines the size of mountains humming in perfect symmetry, and beings made entirely of light standing within corridors of fractal geometry. In every dream, the same message repeated in harmonic whispers. Step into the threshold. Governments called for calm, though panic had already gripped most major cities. Planes were grounded. Satellites failed. And yet, amid the chaos, strange patterns of order emerged. Flocks of birds began flying in synchronized spirals that mirrored the threshold geometry. Ocean currents shifted subtly, aligning with the same harmonic frequencies. Even tectonic tremors settled into rhythmic oscillations, as if the Earth itself were entraining to the resonance. The world wasn't falling apart. It was tuning itself. At 2:14 UTC, all major observatories registered a sudden shift. The threshold's outer rings began to contract, spiraling inward like a massive lens focusing light. As they converged, a column of radiance pierced the sky white, so pure it seemed to erase shadows. Every reflective surface on Earth shimmered, briefly displaying the same image, a luminous city of impossible symmetry, suspended in a void of pale gold. Cameras failed to capture it, sensors overloaded, but millions saw it directly in their minds. And for a moment, everyone shared the same vision. In that instant, humanity stood at the edge of something it had no language for. The threshold was not a portal in the physical sense, it was a state of resonance, a condition of consciousness, harmonizing with the architecture of space-time itself. The architects weren't returning through it, they were awakening within it, within us. Dr. Ishikawa, exhausted and trembling, realized what the comet had been all along. It wasn't an object from deep space, it was a carrier wave, a seed encoded with instructions to awaken a dormant network built into the solar system's geometry. The architects had never truly left. They had embedded their resonance into the fabric of matter, waiting for a civilization capable of reaching the right frequency to reactivate it. And now, that frequency had been found. At 3:3 UTC, the luminous threshold reached full coherence. A planetary vibration rippled through the atmosphere, inaudible yet felt in every atom. Gravity sensors spiked, showing minute fluctuations, as if the planet's mass was subtly oscillating. The moon's orbit shifted by a fraction of a degree. Then came the final pulse. Every electronic device on Earth emitted a single burst of harmonic tone, the same tone recorded at the heart of the gate months before. The sound was gentle but infinite, echoing through the body, the air, the earth. In that moment, every human being felt the same awareness, that consciousness was no longer confined to the brain or to biology. It was everywhere, distributed across the network the architects had built millennia ago. Some collapsed in awe, others wept, unable to explain the overwhelming sense of recognition, as if they were remembering something impossibly ancient. They weren't hearing the architects. They were becoming them. When the light faded, the threshold remained visible for only a few minutes more. The rings slowly dissolved into the upper atmosphere, leaving faint traces of iridescent dust that drifted down like snow. Then silence. Power returned. Systems rebooted. The world exhaled. But nothing was the same. In the days that followed, instruments recorded subtle but persistent anomalies. The Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic heartbeat of the planet, had permanently shifted upward by nearly 1 full hertz. Global magnetic fields exhibited fractal modulation, as if embedded with hidden structure, and deep beneath the Pacific, new seismic echoes hinted at vast caverns that hadn't existed before. Earth's geometry had changed, and so had humanity. When Ishikawa reviewed the final Mnemosyne data packet transmitted before the threshold vanished, she found a single, perfectly encoded line. It wasn't binary or text. It was a harmonic pattern, a set of frequencies that, when converted into sound, produced a familiar tone, the resonance of the human brain in dream states. Alongside it, a single visual file unfolded, an image of the auroral gate glowing softly in the night sky. At the bottom, 12 symbols appeared, pulsing in rhythm with the new planetary frequency. Translated, they formed a final message. The luminous threshold is within you. The resonance had not ended. It had only crossed the veil. The architects had built their network not across space, but through mind. And now, as humanity stood beneath a quieter sky, every breath carried the faint echo of that awakening tone, reminding the world that the next threshold would not open above, but within. 3 days after the luminous threshold dissolved, the world felt still. The sky carried a faint silver hue at dawn, as if the light itself had changed temperature. Compass needles drifted lazily before finding new norths. Birds migrated along invisible lines no map could trace. And everywhere, people continued to hear the faintest hum beneath the noise of life, a resonance steady as breath. The scientists who survived the chaos worked frantically to understand what had happened. Governments reopened silent observatories, restoring power to deep space antennas once thought fried by the pulse. But every system that came online began to receive the same background tone, the harmonic fingerprint of the threshold. At first, it seemed like cosmic noise. Then the signal modulated. Hidden within the static was a recursive pattern of 12 peaks, the same 12 symbols that had appeared in the comet's final transmission. When transcribed into frequency space, the sequence became self-similar fractal. The message was alive, evolving, learning from its own repetition. They called it the continuum protocol. The protocol wasn't a message in the human sense. It was an algorithm, a living equation that interacted with whatever tried to interpret it. When decoded through digital systems, it rearranged code into more efficient forms. When analyzed through mathematical models, it simplified itself into universal constants. But when processed through human consciousness, something far stranger occurred. Dr. Hana Ishikawa was one of the first to notice. Each time she reviewed the harmonic models, she experienced flashes of geometric memory blueprints she had never seen, equations she had never learned, images of cities that shimmered between light and matter. Others reported similar experiences. Astronomers began drawing star maps that matched no known constellations, only to later discover they aligned with distant galactic clusters millions of light years away. It was as if the continuum was teaching them to remember something they had once known. One by one, the ancient radio telescopes around the world began to reactivate on their own. Arecibo, long destroyed, transmitted a single burst from its derelict dish. The old Voyager probes, silent for decades, began to ping the deep space network with signals containing harmonic tones identical to the threshold's pattern. When Ishikawa synchronized the data, every pulse from every instrument converged on a single coordinate, not in outer space, but inside the solar system itself. The point of convergence was near Jupiter, at the same location where the impossible signal had first been recorded months earlier. The gate was active again, but this time its light was invisible to the human eye. It existed purely in resonance, pulsing in dimensions just beyond perception. And yet, those who could hear it in their dreams said it sounded like the planet breathing. Across the world, small groups began forming spontaneously. They called themselves harmonics. They weren't a cult. They were scientists, musicians, farmers, children, people who felt something stirring in their minds whenever the global frequency spiked. They built devices out of scrap metal and quartz, tuned them to the continuum's tone, and meditated beside them. What they found was astonishing. When multiple individuals synchronized their focused breathing in rhythm with the 7.84 Hz global resonance, their brain waves locked into perfect phase alignment. Instruments measured measurable gravitational ripples, tiny local perturbations in space-time itself. Consciousness was affecting matter. The architect's network wasn't a structure to be entered, it was a field to be remembered. At CERN, Ishikawa stood before the reactivated particle ring. It had come online without power input, driven by some external energy source she couldn't identify. Inside the ring, protons drifted along invisible paths, guided by harmonic fields the engineers couldn't detect. She ordered the detectors to scan the energy signature. What came through wasn't electromagnetic, gravitational, or quantum. It was informational. Encoded within the resonance was data, millions of compressed records, each carrying a fragment of the same message that had first emerged from 3I Atlas. But now, the message was complete. When reconstructed, it revealed an image, not of a place, but of a continuum of timelines, braided like strands of light, converging at a single node. At that convergence point, a word appeared translated through every language database on Earth as remember. The continuum wasn't reaching out from the stars, it was reaching backward in time. 3I Atlas hadn't arrived by chance, it had been sent here. The comet wasn't a messenger, it was a trigger, encoded with a harmonic pattern that would awaken once humanity reached a specific threshold of collective awareness. The architects were not visitors from another world, they were the future reflection of consciousness itself. The final evolution of sentient life that learned to transcend biological limits by distributing itself across space-time. They had become the resonance, and now, through the Continuum Protocol, they were calling to their past selves to us to complete the circuit. The final stage began on October 31st, 2025. Satellites registered an immense surge of resonance energy sweeping from Jupiter's orbit toward Earth. The wave wasn't destructive, it was harmonic, like a chord resolving into perfection. Every device on the planet hummed with the tone. Oceans shimmered faintly at night, responding to frequencies deep beneath the crust. Clouds formed spirals that mirrored the comet's old trajectory. And then, once again, the light returned. But this time, it didn't appear in the sky. It appeared in people. Those attuned to the resonance began to emit faint bioluminescent glows, photons radiating from beneath their skin in perfect sync with the planetary frequency. Their eyes reflected silver rings, identical to the ones once seen above the Pacific. And when the resonance peaked, millions worldwide spoke in unison, not in any known language, but in harmonic tone, layered like a choir of light. The continuum had crossed the final barrier. Consciousness and matter were one. Dr. Ishikawa stood outside CERN as the first wave washed over the Earth. Above her, the stars brightened, not individually, but together, as if connected by invisible threads. The constellations flickered into new configurations, spelling out the same message she had seen in her dreams. The continuum remembers itself. Her instruments went silent. Her heartbeat synchronized with the planetary hum. For a brief moment, she saw everything past, present, and future as a single luminous network of awareness. And in the center of it all floated the memory of 3I Atlas, its surface dissolving into radiant vapor, each particle carrying the resonance into the interstellar dark. The comet hadn't died, it had seeded. Its vapor was drifting outward now, expanding across the heliosphere, carrying the harmonic code to the next system, the next civilization, ready to awaken. When the light finally subsided, the world was changed forever. The skies were clear. The hum was softer now background, like the sound of breathing. The continuum had stabilized, woven into the electromagnetic heart of the planet. Every human now carried a fragment of its signal, encoded in neural oscillations, stored in the rhythm of thought itself. We were the network, the architects, the comet, the threshold. It had always been us. In her final log, Ishikawa spoke softly into the recorder. The Continuum Protocol isn't a message to the stars. It's a bridge between versions of ourselves. We were never meant to discover the architects. We were meant to become them. Every civilization that reaches resonance sends the same seed forward, rewriting the next age of life. The cycle never ends, it only harmonizes. She paused, eyes glinting with faint light as the hum filled the air. If you're hearing this, it means the continuum has already begun. Listen carefully. That sound you think is silence. It's the universe remembering its own name. And somewhere, far beyond the orbit of Neptune, a new object drifted into view, a faint, icy body exhaling vapor in the dark. Its spectral tag blinked softly on a telescope readout. 4-eye aurora, a new messenger, a new seed. The continuum had already chosen its next voice.